After the complete dumpster fire that was my Mega Man PC ports video, I got to thinking of how I could improve upon what I had done. Well, it just so happened that my review on Mega Man X4 has turned 1 year old. So I got an idea. The idea to take a look at the oddities with Mega Man on Sega Saturn. At first glance, the Mega Man games on Saturn are pretty much the same as they are on everything else. But that would be a lie. For underneath the surface, there is a lot. Exclusive content, entirely new soundtracks, and so much more. So today I'll be looking at Mega Man 8 and Mega Man X4 Saturn ports, detailing what makes them different from the rest and why they are different. Understand? Let's get into the video. Mega Man 8 is the 8th installment in the original Mega Man series, releasing in 1996 for PS1 and 1997 for Sega Saturn. It is a visual upgrade from prior games due to the new hardware, but something is a bit odd. Mega Man 8 got released for Sega Saturn after its PS1 release. Why is that? Why would they release a Mega Man game on the failing Sega Saturn? And all they had released prior on Sega hardware was the Wily Wars and Mega Man X3, I think. Well, if you notice, the Sega Saturn was actually doing quite well in Japan for a while, and that was the target audience of Mega Man games and Capcom. It also helped the N64 wasn't releasing until the game was a bit into development. But there was something about that release that was odd. Mega Man 8 on Saturn has extra content, which we will be covering today, and we'll also cover the technical differences between the PS1 and Saturn versions. The reason for this is apparently that Sony of America didn't really want Mega Man 8 to be released because it was 2D, and so they made the Saturn version have more stuff so it'd be more appealing. This caused them to want to release an anniversary booklet with the PS1 release because Sony of America also wanted a reason to look better than the Saturn version. So what exactly was the extra stuff added to the Saturn version? The first and most notable additions to the Saturn version is the Cutman boss. He is a hidden boss in the middle stage, and is a recreation of the original Cutman boss, just updated for the new game. And he has a new sprite, granting the player a bolt upon completion. Another boss in the Saturn version that longtime fans should know is Woodman, who is a recreation of another past boss. Updated for the new game, he still uses his shield, and grants the player a bolt upon defeat. There is also a sound test in a gallery mode, and some fan drawings from the time, which is nice, and they're so supportive, it's nice to see that they cared. Now that we have gotten that out of the way, we can get to the more technical stuff, like how the Saturn, being made with 2D in mind, had more effects and animations. Like with the water and the birds in the intro stage, it was capable of doing more with its more advanced 2D hardware. It was able to do things faster and have more intricate 2D stuff on the screen. The only issue is that the sound effects are compressed, and so are the FMVs, which were also cropped weirdly. There is no transparency, but the sprites and animations are better here, so I'll explain why it lacks transparency when I need to. But it's handled here well with flashing textures and some dithering. The thing that I have failed to mention up to this point is that the OST of Mega Man 8, composed by that guy, who I can't pronounce the name of, it's different between the Saturn and PS1 version. Why is that? Well, we would have to look at the Saturn's custom Yamaha sound chip and compare it to the Sony's custom sound chip for the PS1. The PS1 sound chip has 24 sound channels and supports MIDI sequencing, while the Saturn has 32 sound channels and supports many different formats. So when Mega Man 8 was being made for the Saturn, instead of using the internal MIDI that the PS1 used, they took advantage of the Saturn's better sound chip and remade the OST using more clear PCM audio. Some tracks are the same, but a little bit better, like Bass's theme. Here, have a listen. While others, like Tengu Man, were completely remixed for the new hardware. So those were the main things that Mega Man 8 did differently on Saturn. There are some other minor differences with level design, which will be covered in Burncrow SP's upcoming video on Mega Man 8, which will probably be better than this one, but I don't know. Who knows? Unlike Mega Man 8, Mega Man X4 began development with the Saturn in mind, and was probably due to the dumb stuff that was happening while Mega Man 8 was being released, and due to the Saturn's better 2D graphics. But eventually it was released in 1997 for Saturn after a few delays, and on PS1 and PC. Looking at the PC and PS1 versions, they're practically identical, with the PC version having an easy mode and a sound test, which for some reason I did not mention in the PC ports video. But how about the Saturn version? Well, the Saturn version of the game actually had quite a few differences compared to the PS1 version of the game. So let's get into that. Mega Man X4 is the fourth entry in the Mega Man X series. It is the first true 32-bit Mega Man X game. Because it's not a port like X3 was on Saturn, don't worry, I will get to that. X4 started development being a Sega Saturn exclusive, but was delayed, causing it to be multi-platform as I said prior. This also means that the Sega Saturn version of X4 got more time in the oven compared to the PS1 and PC versions of the game. Not only that, but the Japanese box art was radically different, with only 0 on the front cover and a black void. Kenji Inafune said this was a bit weird, but apparently hardcore fans wanted this. And at the time, the Saturn was the more popular console in Japan, and Capcom had been working with Bandai to make model kits of X and his armors, including the X4 Ultimate Armor, which actually was bundled with some copies of X4 for the Saturn, and was called the Special Limited Pack. None of the other versions got this. Also, the Saturn version never got a release in Europe, because 2D game. And Capcom had to wait a bit for Sony to approve X4 for release in the West, because again, 2D game. So what else was different about the Saturn version? Well, looking at it, not much, but there were little additions that made the game better, such as a heatwave effect in some stages, taking advantage of the Saturn's better 2D focused hardware, more balanced audio mixing. The music and sound effects sound good, neither one is louder than the other, and the audio tracks properly loop in the Saturn version, not just playing, ending, and playing again, making it better than the PS1 version. And then the PC version just has wrong songs playing for Sigma, so I guess I can forgive the PS1 version a bit. Certain tracks like the intro stage boss and Frost Wallace have intros this time, because the music properly loops and they can do that. And this isn't because of the Saturn hardware, that's most likely due to them having more time in the oven, like I said. Now for the downgrades. These two are what usually set people off from the Saturn version. Like Mega Man 8, the game has lower quality FMVs, but this time the cropping isn't as bad. But that isn't the major thing people talk about when they talk about this version of the game. The major thing that people think about is the transparency, or the lack of it. Mega Man X4 on Saturn lacks transparency, or does it? In the intro stage, the lights in the background are produced by dithering, but the water and web spider stage is transparent. How is this done? Because it's not done in other parts of the game. So what about it? Well, it's about how the Saturn makes transparent textures. I'm about to explain something that I have no real idea about, so take what I say with a grain of salt as I try to explain this the best I can. There may be a few mistakes, so look this up on your own later if you want to. The Saturn uses two main processors for displaying things on screen, so how does this affect transparency? Well, let's explain how transparency works normally. Normally you could set a sprite or object as transparent and how much you can see through it, but Saturn doesn't do that. That doesn't exactly work at all. When making a sprite on Saturn, you can set it multiple ways, such as opaque, half-transparent, and mesh. This is on both processors, VDP1 for sprites and VDP2 for backgrounds. They interact with each other and work differently from each other because they render sprites differently. The Saturn is not capable of handling full transparency on sprites, and the half-transparent doesn't exactly interact well with other sprites. I'll show an example on screen. This is a limitation, so meshes are used instead due to working with more things and just being easy. But it is possible to do semi-transparency on one layer, which blends the things behind it, and it's made by a different processor from the sprites, that being VDP2 for backgrounds. thus the waterfalls in Web Spider's stage. But for individual sprites they used dithering, or they just made them solid like the dash. And playing the game on an Ultra HD 4K 1080p something resolution, it doesn't look good. But if you play it on the intended hardware, the dithering causes the pixels to blend together, leading to transparency but without actual transparency. And the solid colored dash also looks pretty good. It's not really a thing to worry about, and it's just a personal preference if you want to play either version. All versions of X4 are pretty good, except maybe the mobile version. That one's weird. But for me personally, the lack of transparency is not a bother. Overall, X4 for the Sega Saturn is still worth your time, even if it is practically the PS1 version, but little changes like this can really spice up a playthrough. It makes things more interesting, and as someone who's played this game an ungodly amount of times, I can confirm I like the little changes between versions. Oh yeah, Mega Man X3 was released on Saturn. It was called the worst Saturn game of all time, with slowdown, long load times. Like, those load times are comparable to the Neo Geo CD, and because it's 32-bit, it's somehow missing features. This doesn't even make sense, and it has this weird border around it, making it look really cheap, so let's forget that ever happened. Yeah, it being this garbage isn't exclusive to the Saturn version. So that's the end of the video. Overall, the Mega Man games on Sega Saturn are quite interesting, and they all have a few cool little additions, so I suggest you go try them out. That's all for today, see you next video. And I've been making a history of CGI video series for a while. It hasn't released yet, and I'm not sure when it will be finished, but I'm trying to make it my magnum opus. So, see you guys again soon. I'm not sure what video, but I'll see you guys again soon.